6 months had passed since I buried Charles after a sudden heart attack. We had been married for 45 years. Charles wasn't a wealthy man, but he was steady, hardworking, endlessly devoted. He left me very little in material terms, but he gave me something priceless: his diamond wedding ring. The ring he placed on my finger on our wedding day. The ring that symbolized every promise we had kept through decades of love and commitment. That ring was the only treasure he left me, the one thing that kept me connected to him every single day. So when I realized the ring was gone, my heart sank. I turned to my daughter, Claire, my only child, the one I had carried, raised, and sacrificed for. She stood in my kitchen, arms crossed, her lips curved into a smirk I had never seen before. "We needed the cash for our big day, Mom," she said. Her fiancé stood just behind her, silent, but Claire's words cut deeper than any knife. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had sold my husband's diamond ring to fund her wedding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her, demand sense. Instead, I stood frozen, hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the sink. The kitchen still smelled faintly of Charles's favorite coffee blend, and the memory of him seemed alive in that room. Yet my daughter looked at me as if my grief were a nuisance, as if I should simply get over it. "Claire," I whispered, my throat tight, "that ring was your father's. It was the only thing of his I had left." He shrugged. "You're being dramatic. Dad wouldn't want you clinging to the past. We need to think about the future. My future, my wedding. That's what matters now." Her casual cruelty cut deeper than any insult. Charles had worked double shifts to buy that ring when we were just starting out. I remembered the way he had held my hand, slipping it on my finger as he promised me forever. And now that promise was in the hands of a stranger, sold without my knowledge, my consent, or a trace of shame. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood. But then the phone rang. I answered with a shaky voice. On the other end was a man who introduced himself as Mr. Donovan, a jeweler from State Street. His voice was careful, deliberate, almost apologetic. "Ma'am," he said, "you need to hear what we found inside the ring box." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The ring was gone, but the box, the small velvet box Charles had always kept in the top drawer of his dresser, was not empty. Mr. Donovan explained that when they examined it, they discovered something hidden, something that seemed intentional. He asked me to come by the store. My heart pounded. Betrayal tastes bitter, metallic, like pennies on the tongue. In that moment I tasted it fully. My own daughter had stolen from me, and yet somehow Charles's presence still lingered, whispering from beyond the grave through that mysterious box. I stood in the kitchen staring at Claire, who had already pulled out her phone, scrolling as if nothing had happened. "You will regret this," I said quietly. Not as a threat but as truth. Deep inside me something had shifted. I was no longer the mother who bent over backward to keep the peace, who swallowed insults and endured neglect in silence. I was Charles's wife. I was Eleanor Sullivan, and I was not finished. Claire rolled her eyes. "Honestly, Mom, you should be thanking me. That ring wasn't doing you any good just sitting in a drawer. At least now it's helping us start our life together." Her words made my chest ache, but I stayed silent. Rage boiled inside me, but I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me shatter. Instead, I thought of Charles, of the way he always said I was stronger than I knew. Maybe he had prepared for this. Maybe that was why something had been hidden in the ring box. I didn't argue further. I didn't plead. I simply dried my hands, took my purse, and walked out of the kitchen. Claire called after me, but I ignored her. My steps were steady, though my heart trembled. If Charles had left me one final message, I was going to find it. The betrayal of a child is unlike any other wound. It is not a stranger's cruelty. It is the cruelty of someone you once cradled in your arms. But betrayal also has a way of lighting a fire. As I drove toward the jeweler's store, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. When I left the jeweler that day, I drove home in silence. The streets of Chicago blurred past me, but all I could think about was Charles. 45 years of marriage, 45 years of promises, scraped knees and late-night talks, arguments and forgiveness, raising our only daughter together. He had been a man of simple means, but he worked harder than anyone I had ever known. To buy that diamond ring, he spent nearly a year working extra shifts at the factory. He came home exhausted, hands blistered, but his eyes carried pride, because he was saving for the future he wanted with me. I still remember the night he placed that ring on my finger. We stood in a small church surrounded by family, the June air sticky and warm. Charles's voice trembled, not from nerves, but from the weight of his own sincerity. He slipped the ring on my hand and whispered, "This is forever, Eleanor. I will take care of you until my last breath." And he kept that promise. Even in death, he had left something behind inside that velvet box. Now, sitting alone in the kitchen, I stared at the empty space on my dresser where the box had once been. The house felt unbearably still. The tick of the old clock on the wall was too loud. The refrigerator hummed, and every sound reminded me of Charles's absence. At dinner, the chair across from mine sat empty. The place where he once sipped coffee and teased me about oversalting the soup. That silence pressed down on me like a weight. Loneliness has a sound all its own. It is the scrape of a fork on a plate with no one to answer your question. It is the echo of your own footsteps down a hallway where two used to walk. And it is the cruelest sound of all, the absence of a voice you loved for decades. I tried to distract myself by calling old friends. Once I had a circle of women from church, book club, and the neighborhood. But in recent months, their voices had grown distant. Conversations were shorter, invitations fewer. When I pressed, I received polite excuses. Then one day I overheard something that cut me to the bone. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, caught me in the driveway as I was collecting the mail. She hesitated, shifting from foot to foot. Finally, she asked gently, "Eleanor, are you doing all right? Claire mentioned you've been forgetting things lately. Your memory isn't what it used to be." I froze. The envelope in my hand nearly slipped to the ground. Claire had been telling people I was losing my mind. I smiled faintly at Mrs. Patterson, assuring her I was fine. But inside my chest burned with anger. That explained why my friends had grown cautious, why neighbors had started speaking to me slowly, carefully, as though I might break. My daughter wasn't just stealing from me. She was crafting a story that I was senile, planting seeds of doubt in everyone around me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the flickering light bulb above. Charles's coffee mug still sat on the shelf, the one with the faded Cubs logo. I traced its rim with my finger and whispered, "You knew, didn't you, Charles? You knew Claire would do this." Tears blurred my vision, but beneath them was something stronger. I was not losing my memory. I was not weak. I was not going to let Claire write a story where I was the fragile old woman who needed to be managed. Charles's entire life had been about protecting me and providing for me. And now it was my turn to protect what he left behind. The next morning, I went for a short walk around the block. The crisp air bit at my cheeks and the sky hung heavy with gray clouds. People waved politely, but I saw the flicker of hesitation in their eyes. The same hesitation Mrs. Patterson had shown. Claire's whispers had done their work. In their minds, I was already fragile, already halfway to being tucked away in some facility. But I wasn't fragile. I was furious. I thought of Charles again, of the way he always believed in my strength. "You are tougher than you know," he used to say whenever life knocked us down. I repeated those words to myself as I walked, each step steadier than the last. If Claire wanted to convince the world I was slipping, then I would prove her wrong. I would prove to everyone and to myself that I was sharper than ever. When I returned home, I opened the drawer where Charles had kept his paperwork. My fingers brushed over neatly organized folders, the evidence of his meticulous nature. Somewhere in all of this I knew was the truth he had left behind. The jeweler's call had been only the beginning. The velvet box had given me a clue, and Charles never left a clue without a purpose. Loneliness tried to wrap itself around me that night, whispering that I was alone and powerless. But as I looked at Charles's mug and the space where his ring once lay, I felt something shift. I was not just a grieving widow. I was the woman Charles had trusted with his life, the woman who had endured decades of sacrifice. I had a voice and I still had choices. And above all, I had a secret waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, I drove downtown to Stein's Jewelry, the shop my daughter had named so casually, as if it were nothing more than a grocery store where she had traded my life's memories for a handful of dollars. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The scent of polished wood and metal cleaner hung in the air. The store was quiet, almost reverent, like a chapel where people came to exchange their most personal treasures. Behind the counter stood Mr. Stein, a man in his 70s with silver hair combed neatly to one side. His face was lined with years of hearing stories attached to rings, necklaces, and watches. He looked up at me, recognition dawning in his eyes, his expression softening into something like pity. "You must be Mrs. Sullivan," he said gently. "Your daughter sold us a diamond wedding ring earlier this week." The words made my chest tighten. I nodded, my throat too dry to respond. He studied me for a long moment, then sighed heavily as if he carried the burden of my grief with me. "I wish I had better news," he continued. "But the ring itself is gone. A collector came in early yesterday morning and paid cash. It left the shop before I even realized the story behind it." I gripped the edge of the glass counter, my knuckles white. Hearing it aloud felt like losing Charles all over again. My mind conjured images of a stranger slipping that ring onto their finger, unaware of its history, unaware that it had been bought with sweat and love, not just money. "I see," I whispered, forcing steadiness into my voice. "But there is something you should know," Mr. Stein said quickly, as if not wanting to send me away empty-handed. He bent down, rummaged beneath the counter, and pulled out a small manila envelope. His hand lingered on it for a moment before placing it in front of me. "We found this inside the original ring box. I thought it might matter." My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt strangely heavy, as if carrying more than just its weight. With careful hands, I opened the flap and slid out a folded piece of stationery. My breath caught the instant I saw the handwriting. It was Charles's, tidy, precise. The same script he used when balancing our checkbook or leaving me notes on the refrigerator. I unfolded it slowly, my vision blurring with tears. The message was short, only a few words written in his unmistakable hand. Box 12, First National Bank, June 14th. I read it again, my mind stumbling over the details. Safe deposit box number 12, First National Bank, June 14th. That date was not random. It was our wedding day, the day Charles slipped the ring on my finger and promised me forever. The paper trembled in my hands as I realized this was no accident. Charles had hidden a secret inside the box where he once kept my ring, waiting for the moment when I might need it most. A rush of emotions surged through me: grief, longing, confusion, and something else: hope. For months I had lived under the weight of loss and betrayal. But here in my hands was a clue, a sign that Charles had thought ahead, that he had left something for me to discover, something more than memories. "What does it mean?" I murmured aloud, though the question was more to Charles than to Mr. Stein. The jeweler tilted his head. "I couldn't say, Mrs. Sullivan. But the way it was folded, hidden in the velvet, it was deliberate. Whatever is in that box, your husband wanted you to find it." I pressed the paper to my chest. My heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. What could Charles possibly have stored away in a bank vault all these years? Why had he never mentioned it to me? I thought back to our marriage. The arguments about money, the way he sometimes grew quiet when bills came due. I had always assumed it was stress. But what if there had been something more? What if Charles had been carrying a secret not out of malice but out of protection? My hands shook as I returned the envelope to my purse. "Thank you," I said softly. Mr. Stein's eyes lingered on me with sympathy. "Your husband must have loved you very much to leave behind a message like this." I swallowed hard, unable to speak. Love was too small a word for what Charles had given me. Even from the grave, he was still guiding me, still protecting me from a world that had turned suddenly hostile. When I stepped back out onto the street, the air felt colder, sharper. Cars rushed past, horns blaring, but everything seemed muted compared to the roar of thoughts inside my mind. The note burned in my purse, a silent demand that I uncover its meaning. As I walked to my car, I could almost hear Charles's voice in my memory. "You're stronger than you know, Eleanor. Stronger than you think." Maybe this was what he meant. Maybe he had known there would come a day when I would need to summon a strength I had never tapped before. And maybe, just maybe, this safe deposit box was the key to surviving what lay ahead. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, and let the tears fall freely. My daughter had taken his ring. She had tried to strip away the last piece of him that I held dear. But Charles, in his quiet, methodical way, had left me something more valuable than gold or diamonds. A secret, a mystery, a path forward, and I would follow it. That night I could not sleep. I sat at my bedroom window, the little note from Charles lying on my nightstand, its few words echoing in my head. Safe Deposit Box 12, First National Bank, June 14th. I turned the paper over again and again, tracing his handwriting with my fingertip. It felt as though his hand was guiding mine. June 14th. I closed my eyes and was carried back to that humid summer day in 1976. I was a young bride, nervous but certain. The church smelled of lilies and candles. Charles's hand trembled only slightly as he slipped the diamond ring onto my finger. His voice was quiet, but the conviction in his words was unshakable. "This is forever, Eleanor. This will always be my promise to you." The memory came so vividly that I could hear the music, feel the warmth of his hand, and see the hope in his eyes. I clutched the note to my chest. Charles had tied the clue directly to our wedding date. That was no coincidence. He knew I would understand. He had always marked that day in ways only I noticed, writing it in the margins of calendars, scribbling it on receipts, jotting it in the corners of his ledgers. Even when we argued, even when life felt heavy, he found small ways to remind me of June 14th. Now I realized he had been leaving breadcrumbs all along, weaving our date into his paperwork as though training me to see patterns others would ignore. The thought steadied me. I wasn't chasing shadows. I was following a map Charles had drawn long before his death. The next morning I found Claire in the kitchen pouring coffee. She looked at me with annoyance, as though I were an unwelcome guest in my own home. "I'm planning to visit First National Bank later today," I said calmly. Her eyebrows shot up. "For what?" I placed the note on the counter, though I didn't hand it to her. "Your father left me something. A safe deposit box. I need to see what's inside." Claire's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "Mom, you should be resting, not chasing after old scraps of paper. Dad's gone. You're only torturing yourself." I straightened my shoulders. "Your father wanted me to find this. I owe it to him and to myself, to follow through." Her eyes narrowed. "Mothers your age shouldn't be handling complicated things like that. You should let me take care of it." I could feel her probing, angling for control. "No," I said firmly. "This is between your father and me." Claire sighed theatrically, stirring sugar into her mug. "Suit yourself. Just don't expect it to mean anything. Sometimes old men scribble nonsense. Her words stung, but I refused to let them shake me. Charles had never scribbled nonsense. He had been meticulous, deliberate, precise. Everything he did had a reason. And the more Claire belittled me, the more certain I became that I had to uncover what lay behind that vault door. After she left for the day, I went upstairs and opened Charles's old desk drawers. Inside, I found stacks of folders labeled in his neat handwriting: tax returns, utility bills, bank ledgers. I flipped through page after page, and my breath caught when I noticed something peculiar. In the corner of several documents, insurance policies, receipts, even grocery lists, Charles had written 6/14, sometimes just the numbers, sometimes with our initials. At first, I thought it had been habit, a sentimental quirk. But now I saw it differently. He had been embedding our wedding date into everything like a secret code. I sat back in the chair, the papers spread around me. My heart beat faster. This was no coincidence. Charles had been building a system, a trail only I could follow. He trusted that I would notice because he knew me better than anyone else. The realization gave me strength. For weeks, I had felt like a victim, powerless against Claire's cruelty, isolated by her whispers that I was losing my mind. But in that moment I knew better. Charles had seen this storm coming. He had prepared me for it in his quiet, methodical way. And now it was my responsibility to honor that preparation. I folded the note carefully, placed it in my wallet, and grabbed my purse. The decision was made. I would go to the bank the very next day. Whatever secrets Charles had kept hidden, I was ready to face them. That evening, as I set the table for one, the loneliness pressed in again. The chair across from mine stayed empty, and I felt the ache of Charles's absence like an open wound. But this time the silence was different. Beneath the grief, a current of determination hummed. For the first time since his death, I felt a purpose beyond surviving each day. I felt Charles guiding me forward. I washed the dishes slowly, watching the water swirl down the drain, and whispered aloud, "I will find out what you wanted me to know, Charles. I promise." The house answered only with the creak of the floorboards and the hum of the refrigerator, but I could almost imagine his approving smile. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor. She asked politely if I was doing all right, then hesitated before saying, "Claire mentioned, you've been having trouble remembering things. Is that true?" The words hit me like a slap. So it was true. My daughter had been spreading stories about me, planting seeds of doubt in the community, setting the stage for something darker. My hands tightened on the receiver. "No, Margaret," I said firmly. "My memory is just fine. Don't believe everything you hear." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long time. Claire wasn't just careless, she was cunning. She was trying to paint me as incompetent. And that meant what Charles had left me wasn't just sentimental. It was protection. I turned off the light, slid into bed, and clutched the note one last time before drifting to sleep. Tomorrow I would go to the bank. Tomorrow the investigation would begin. The next morning I stood inside the marble lobby of First National Bank, the note Charles had left clenched tightly in my hand. The polished floors reflected the light from the high windows, and the faint scent of floor wax mixed with the smell of paper and ink. My heart thudded as I approached the counter and handed the note to the young teller. "I need access to safe deposit box number 12, I said, my voice steady though my palms were damp. The teller glanced at the paper, then looked at me. "Do you have identification, ma'am?" I slid my driver's license across the counter. She studied it, typed something into her computer, and after a moment nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Sullivan, you're authorized on this box. Please follow me." My knees felt weak as she led me through a long hallway and down a flight of stairs into the vault. The thick door groaned open, revealing rows upon rows of small metal boxes, each containing secrets and legacies of countless families. She pointed to number 12. Take your time. I'll give you privacy. The heavy silence of the vault pressed against me as I slipped the key into the lock. My hands trembled, but the key turned smoothly. With a soft click, the door opened and I pulled out the metal drawer. It was heavier than I expected. I carried it to the small private room the teller had provided and set it on the table. For a moment I just stared at it. My breath came shallow, my heart racing. What had Charles hidden here waiting for me to find? Finally I lifted the lid. Inside was a neatly stacked folder and a small black USB drive resting on top. My fingers brushed the cool plastic and a shiver crawled up my spine. I opened the folder first. The top document made my throat tighten. It was a life insurance policy, Charles's life insurance policy, listing me as the sole beneficiary. The coverage amount was clear: $2 million. My vision blurred with tears. Charles had worked his whole life to provide for us. And even in death he had left behind a safety net large enough to secure my future. I pressed the paper against my chest, sobs breaking free before I could stop them. It wasn't about the money. It was about what it meant. Charles had thought of me, planned for me, protected me, even when he knew his time might be short. For months I had felt abandoned. But now I realized I had never been alone. When I regained my composure, I turned to the rest of the documents. What I saw next made my stomach twist. There were reports, transcripts, and photographs, all neatly labeled. The header on the first page read, "Private Investigation Report." Subject, Claire Sullivan. My hands shook as I began to read. The report detailed gambling debts my daughter had racked up on online betting sites. Tens of thousands of dollars owed to people I had never heard of. Worse, it listed loans taken out under questionable information, loans her fiancé had co-signed. The further I read, the colder I became. The investigator wrote that Claire and her fiancé had been inquiring about inheritance laws. They had contacted attorneys to learn how to contest a will and even asked about the process for declaring a parent mentally incompetent. The words blurred as hot tears filled my eyes. My daughter, the child I had held against my chest, the girl I had stayed up nights nursing through fevers, had been plotting to strip me of my dignity and my future. The report included transcripts of conversations between Claire and her fiancé. In one she said plainly, "Once Mom is out of the way, everything will be ours. We just have to push her into signing something." My hand flew to my mouth. I could hear her voice in my head, clear as day, dripping with greed. Beneath the transcripts were photographs. Claire meeting with a man outside a cafe, her fiancé exchanging an envelope with another stranger. Dates and times were carefully noted. Every page painted a picture of deception and betrayal. Finally, I turned to the last page. It was a letter written by Charles in his familiar script. "Eleanor, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. I didn't want to burden you with suspicion while I was alive, but I couldn't ignore what I saw. Claire has changed. Her choices are dangerous. I asked a professional to investigate, and these are the findings. I know this will break your heart, but I couldn't let you face it without protection. Everything you need is here. Use it. Don't let anyone take from you what we built together. You are stronger than you know. Forever yours, Charles." The words blurred as I clutched the letter, my sobs echoing in the small room. Charles had known. He had suspected our daughter's intentions long before I did, and he had carried the burden of that knowledge silently, shielding me until he no longer could. I picked up the USB drive with trembling hands, sliding it into my purse. I didn't know what files it contained, but I was certain it held more evidence, more proof of what Charles had discovered. My grief twisted into something new, a fierce determination. I closed the folder, slid everything back into the box, and carried it carefully out to the teller. My voice was steady when I said, "I'm finished." "Thank you." Back in my car, I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, my tears drying on my cheeks. My daughter had betrayed me in ways I could never have imagined, but my husband had armed me with the truth. I whispered into the quiet car, "Thank you, Charles. I will not waste what you've given me. I will not let them win." For the first time in months, my grief felt lighter. It had been replaced by something far more powerful: resolve. When I got home from the bank, I placed the folder on Charles's old desk and sat staring at the small black USB drive. It looked so ordinary, yet I knew it could hold the answers to questions I didn't even know how to ask. My hands shook as I slid it into my laptop. For a moment the screen stayed blank and I almost hoped it wouldn't work. But then a folder opened and inside were dozens of audio files, each labeled with dates that stretched across the last year of Charles's life. I clicked on the first one. The sound crackled. Then a voice I knew better than my own filled the room. It was Claire. "Once Mom is in a facility, we'll have control. All we need is her signature on the power of attorney paperwork. After that, the house is as good as sold." Her words stabbed into me like ice. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. She sounded so casual, so confident, like she was discussing the weather, not her own mother's life. Then I heard her fiancé. His tone was smooth, almost rehearsed. "Exactly. She doesn't need all that space anyway. The market is good. We could sell quickly and use the money to pay off the loans. No one would question it." I pressed a hand to my mouth. They weren't just thinking about it. They had a plan, a detailed, heartless plan. I clicked on another file. This one was recorded only weeks before Charles died. Claire's voice again, sharper this time. "Mom is stubborn, but she's getting older. If we keep telling people she's forgetful, eventually everyone will believe it. Once the story is out, it'll be easier to convince the court she can't handle her finances." I gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. It was true. The whispers from neighbors, the careful questions from friends. It all made sense now. Claire had been poisoning the well, crafting a narrative that I was losing my mind, and I had been too trusting to see it. The next recording nearly broke me. Claire laughed lightly. "Dad always kept files on everything. I bet he's got some account or policy hidden away. Once we find it, we'll be set. Mom won't even know what hit her." Charles had known. He must have heard these conversations himself. That was why he'd acted, why he'd hidden the evidence, why he had written the note in the ring box. He had been protecting me even while I was blind to what was happening under my own roof. Tears spilled down my face. But alongside the sorrow, something else rose: strength. It was faint at first, like the flicker of a match in the dark. But with every word I heard, it grew brighter. My grief had left me vulnerable, but Charles had left me tools. He had known I would need proof. I played one more file. Claire again, this time her voice cold. "She's fragile. If she resists, we can always push harder. Stress her out. Make her doubt herself. The sooner she signs, the better." The sound of her fiancé laughing in agreement made my stomach turn. My daughter. The same girl whose hand Charles once guided as she learned to write her name. The girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose tears I had kissed away, was plotting to strip me of my independence and dignity. I leaned back in the chair, covering my face with both hands. The recordings played on one after another, each more devastating than the last. They spoke about selling the house, dividing the proceeds, even discussing how they would redecorate once I was out of the picture. The pain was unbearable, but beneath it I felt a steady pulse of defiance. They thought I was weak. They thought age had made me helpless. But they were wrong. I closed the folder and removed the USB drive, clutching it in my hand like a weapon. This was more than betrayal. It was evidence, direct, undeniable, recorded in their own voices. For months I had been drifting, lost in grief. But now I saw clearly. Charles had left me this arsenal of truth and I would not waste it. I stood slowly, wiping my tears. The ache in my chest was still there, but it had transformed. It was no longer only sorrow. It was resolve. Claire and her fiancé had underestimated me. They saw only a grieving widow, isolated and vulnerable. But what they didn't see was the woman Charles had loved and trusted. The woman who had stood by his side through decades of hardship. I whispered into the empty room, "You thought you could silence me, Claire, but your father's voice is louder than yours, and through him I will find mine again." I placed the USB carefully back into its case, then set it on the desk beside Charles's mug. My tears had dried, replaced by something sharp and clear. The recordings were not just proof of their betrayal. They were the key to my survival, the evidence I needed to defend myself. As I turned off the light, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. For the first time in months, I didn't see only a grieving widow. I saw a fighter. 2 days after I listened to the recordings, I was sitting at Charles's desk, reviewing the investigator's notes again when the doorbell rang. The sharp chimes startled me, breaking the stillness of the house. Through the window I saw 2 strangers on my porch. One was a young woman in a navy suit carrying a leather briefcase, her posture stiff with professional confidence. Beside her stood a man in his 30s with a tablet tucked under his arm. I opened the door cautiously. The woman smiled, polished and rehearsed. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Claire Bennett, an attorney with Wells and Carter Associates. This is my associate Daniel." The man gave a polite nod. Claire's voice softened as though she were speaking to a child. "We're here on behalf of your daughter, Claire. She's concerned about your well-being. She thought it might be helpful if we spoke about some legal options to make your life easier." A chill swept over me, but I stepped aside and allowed them in. My kitchen had always been a place of warmth, but now it felt invaded. Claire placed her briefcase on the table and opened it with a click. She slid a stack of papers toward me. "These documents," she explained smoothly, "would grant Claire power of attorney. It's only temporary, of course, just until you feel ready to manage things on your own again. She would handle your financial decisions, pay bills, make sure nothing falls through the cracks. It's really just a safety net." Her tone was kind, almost soothing, but the words carried the same sharp edge I had heard in Claire's recordings. I sat down slowly, folding my hands in my lap. "So Claire believes I cannot handle my own affairs." Claire hesitated. "She's simply worried. She mentioned you've been under a lot of stress since your husband passed. It's normal for people your age to find financial matters overwhelming." The words stung, but instead of reacting, I leaned back and studied her. I had learned something from Charles. Silence could be powerful. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between us. Finally, I reached to the side of the table and pulled forward the folder Charles had left me. I slid it open and laid several pages across the wood. Photographs of Claire with her fiancé, transcripts of conversations, and records of debts that stretched into 6 figures. Claire blinked, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. Daniel leaned closer, his eyes widening as he scanned the documents. "These," I said quietly, "are not the actions of a daughter worried about her mother's well-being. They are the actions of someone desperate for money, someone willing to manipulate the truth." Claire cleared her throat, regaining her composure. "Mrs. Sullivan, we can't speak to the validity of these papers." "You don't have to," I interrupted firmly. "Because I can. I know exactly what they mean. They mean that Claire and her fiancé are drowning in debt. They mean they have been planning to sell my home once they control my signature. They mean they have been whispering lies to my neighbors about my memory so the courts will believe I am incompetent." The room fell silent. The tick of the kitchen clock was the only sound. Claire's eyes flickered with unease. Daniel shifted back in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. I gathered the documents into a neat stack, then placed them directly in front of her. "Tell my daughter this," I said evenly. "Her plan will not work. I am not signing anything, and if she continues, I have more than enough evidence to bring to the proper authorities." For a moment neither of them spoke. Claire's confident expression had faltered into something brittle. He had known our daughter's greed would twist her into someone I barely recognized. That was why he had prepared. That was why he had left me proof no rumor could erase. I wiped my tears and straightened my back. "Charles," I whispered, "you gave me everything I need. I will not be afraid anymore." I stood and carried the groceries into the pantry, each step firmer than the last. If Claire wanted me silenced, she would be disappointed. I would not crumble under her lies. I had the truth on my side, and the truth was stronger than gossip. Later that evening, I received a phone call from another woman at church. Her voice was careful, hesitant. "Eleanor, some of us are worried. Claire says you've been forgetting important details, even leaving the stove on. Is everything all right?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Everything is fine," I said firmly. "My daughter is mistaken. I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself." When I hung up, I sat for a long time in silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Yes, Claire had managed to isolate me from the people I loved. Yes, she had convinced others to doubt me, but she had underestimated one thing. I was no longer the woman who bent under every storm. I was the woman Charles had trusted to carry on, the woman he had prepared with every careful note, every breadcrumb leading to the truth. I glanced at the calendar hanging on the wall. June 14th was circled in Charles's handwriting, bold and deliberate. It reminded me of his promise at the altar. "This is forever." His voice echoed in my memory, steady and strong. I rose from the chair with renewed determination. Claire could twist words, but she could not erase facts. She could spread rumors, but she could not undo the evidence Charles had placed in my hands. The battle for my dignity had already begun, but I was no longer fighting blindly. "Charles," I whispered again, "you left me everything, and I am no longer afraid." 2 evenings after my unsettling trip to the grocery store, I heard the crunch of tires on my driveway. I peeked through the lace curtain and saw Claire's car pulling up, her fiancé Ryan behind the wheel. My chest tightened. They hadn't called ahead. Visits from them were never casual anymore. They always came with an agenda. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I studied myself, inhaling deeply before opening the door. Claire stood there with her perfect smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. Ryan hovered just behind her, his expression taut, his shoulders stiff under his tailored jacket. "Hi, Mom," Claire chirped, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd check on you." Her tone was light, but her eyes flicked quickly around the room, scanning the desk where Charles's folder usually sat. I had moved it earlier, locking it safely away. Ryan closed the door behind him and offered a nod that felt more like an inspection than a greeting. "Everything all right?" I asked calmly. Claire's smile widened. "Of course. We just wanted to see how you're holding up. You've been through so much." She brushed invisible dust off the back of a chair and sat down, crossing her legs elegantly. Ryan stayed standing, leaning against the doorframe with his arms folded. I walked to the table and set down 2 cups of tea I had prepared in advance. My hands were steady, though my heart thumped against my ribs. I knew this visit wasn't about concern. It was about information. And this time I intended to give them exactly what they wanted, just not in the way they expected. "I've been sorting through some of Charles's things," I began, stirring my tea slowly. "I actually came across something interesting." Both their heads lifted slightly. Claire leaned forward. What kind of something? I kept my tone casual as though it were nothing remarkable. An old investment account. Nothing major but still a surprise. Your father was always so meticulous. The air in the room shifted. Ryan straightened, his eyes narrowing. Claire's smile faltered for the briefest second before returning, sharper now, edged with hunger. An investment account? She repeated carefully. Where? What kind of account? I shrugged, feigning indifference. I'm not entirely sure yet. Some paperwork, some numbers. I'll have Charles's old lawyer look into it. He'll know what to make of it. The mask slipped. Claire's eyes flashed and Ryan's jaw tightened. Their eagerness bled through no matter how they tried to hide it. Claire's fingers tapped nervously against her teacup. Lawyers are expensive, Mom, she said quickly. You shouldn't waste money on that. Ryan is great with numbers. We could take a look for you. Ryan nodded, his voice low and steady. It would save you a lot of hassle. Just show us what you found and we'll handle it. No need to complicate things. I smiled faintly, sipping my tea. Thank you, but I'd prefer to do it properly. Charles trusted his lawyer. So do I. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. Mom, you're making this harder than it has to be. If you found something, we should know about it. It could affect all of us. Her words stung, but I kept my face composed. It affects me, Claire. It was left to me. The silence thickened. Ryan shifted closer to the table, his tone tightening. Why don't you tell us exactly what the paperwork said? Numbers, names, anything. I set down my teacup, meeting his gaze steadily. It's in good hands. That's all you need to know. For the first time, Claire's composure cracked. Her voice rose, sharp and impatient. You don't understand, Mom. We need this. We need it before the wedding. There are debts to settle. She stopped suddenly, her eyes widening as if she had revealed too much. But it was too late. Her words hung in the air like smoke. Debts. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They weren't just greedy. They were desperate. The gambling, the loans, the financial chaos. It had all caught up with them. My discovery threatened to be their lifeline, and they would stop at nothing to seize it. I sat back slowly, my heart aching but my voice steady. So that's it. It isn't about helping me. It's about rescuing yourselves. Claire's face flushed red. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is, I interrupted. You just confirmed everything. Ryan stepped in quickly, his voice smoother, trying to regain control. Look, Mrs. Sullivan, we're all family here. Let's not make this harder. If Charles left behind assets, shouldn't they benefit everyone? Isn't that what he would have wanted? I turned my gaze to him, my voice cold. Don't you dare tell me what Charles would have wanted. The room fell silent. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes darting toward Ryan for guidance. He gave her a slight nod, but his jaw was tight with frustration. I rose to my feet, gathering the cups from the table. This conversation is over. I will let Charles's lawyer handle everything. Claire's voice sharpened, trembling with desperation. Mom, please. If you care about me at all, you let us help. We're in trouble and this could fix everything. Her words twisted inside me. I remembered the child who once clung to my leg on her first day of school, the teenager who cried over heartbreak, the young woman I had supported through every misstep. But now, standing in my kitchen, she was someone else entirely. Someone who saw me not as her mother but as an obstacle. I care about you, I said softly. But I will not be used. Her eyes filled with angry tears. Ryan muttered something under his breath and pulled her toward the door. Let's go. At the threshold, Claire turned back, her face hardened. You'll regret this, Mom. The door slammed, leaving me in the quiet hum of the house. My hands shook as I placed the cups in the sink. The ache in my chest was almost unbearable, but beneath it pulsed something stronger. Resolve. Charles had known. He had prepared me. And now I finally understood why. It was a gray morning when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, expecting another solicitor or one of Claire's allies trying to pry into my affairs. But when I lifted the receiver, I heard the familiar voice of Mr. Stein from the jewelry store. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, his tone careful. "I believe I have something that belongs to you." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "The gentleman who purchased your husband's ring came back yesterday. He said it wasn't truly his to keep. He asked me to return it to you with the explanation that Charles had entrusted him years ago. He claimed your husband gave specific instructions if anything ever happened." I sank into Charles's chair, clutching the phone. My hands trembled. "You have the ring?" "Yes," Mr. Stein said softly. "In its original box. He insisted I place it directly into your hands." Within the hour I was standing in the shop again. The bell above the door jingled and Mr. Stein emerged from the back, carrying a small velvet box. His face was solemn, but there was something almost reverent in the way he held it. "Here," he said, sliding it across the counter. "Charles told me to keep this safe until the day it found its way back to you." I reached out with shaking fingers and lifted the lid. There it was, Charles's diamond ring gleaming under the lights, the same ring he had slipped on my finger nearly half a century ago. My breath caught, tears filling my eyes. It felt as though a piece of him had returned to me, as if the years between then and now had collapsed into this single fragile moment. I whispered his name, Charles, and slipped the ring onto my finger. The weight was familiar, grounding like coming home. But then I noticed something. The box was heavier than I remembered. When I turned it over, I felt the faintest ridge along the back, a line that hadn't been there before. My heart raced. I pressed gently and the velvet lining shifted beneath my touch. A hidden compartment. My fingers trembled as I pried it open. Inside, tucked into a narrow slit, was a tiny micro-SD card. The USB Charles had left me had already revealed his investigation, his fears, his proof. But this was something else entirely. I looked up at Mr. Stein, my voice shaking. "Did you know about this?" He shook his head. "No. The gentleman who returned the ring didn't mention it. He simply said Charles trusted him. Beyond that, I can't say." Clutching the box and the card, I hurried home, my mind racing. What more could Charles have left me? Hadn't he already shown me enough? But deep down I knew him. He was never careless. If there was another secret, it was because he wanted me to find it, because it mattered. At home I slid the card into my laptop. For a moment the screen stayed blank and I thought perhaps time had erased its contents. Then a folder appeared. My hands hovered over the mouse as I clicked it open. Dozens of files. Audio recordings, video clips, scanned documents. I clicked on the first video. The screen flickered and Charles's face appeared. He was sitting at his office desk, looking older, thinner, as though the weight of what he carried had pressed heavily on him. "Eleanor," he began, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "If you found this, then you've uncovered the truth about Claire. But there is more you need to know. What I left in the bank vault was only part of the story. This card contains everything else. Every conversation I recorded in this house. Every meeting Claire had with lawyers. Every attempt she made to question your competency. I built this archive so that if she ever tried to take what is yours, you would have proof strong enough to silence every lie." I covered my mouth with my hand as the tears fell. Charles's gaze through the screen was direct, almost urgent. "I'm sorry," he continued, "that our daughter became someone we no longer recognize. I hoped until the end that she would change, but hope cannot protect you. Evidence can. Use this, Eleanor. Protect yourself. Protect what we built. The video ended and I sat in stunned silence. My body shook not just from grief, but from the sheer magnitude of what Charles had left me. He hadn't only protected me. He had outmaneuvered Claire at every turn. He had anticipated her cruelty, her manipulation, and created a shield that no whisper, no rumor, no lawyer could pierce. I clicked another file. It was audio. Claire's voice, sharp and impatient. Once she's declared incompetent, it's done. We'll move fast, sell the house, settle the debts. She won't even know until it's over. The sound of Ryan agreeing made bile rise in my throat. But instead of breaking me, it steeled me. This was undeniable proof. More than gossip, more than suspicion. It was their own voices plotting my downfall. I sat back, the ring gleaming on my finger, the micro SD card still loaded with its arsenal of truth. For the first time I felt the scales tip entirely in my favor. Claire thought she had isolated me, painted me as frail, convinced the world I was slipping away. But Charles had given me everything I needed to turn the tide. I whispered into the quiet. You planned every step, didn't you, Charles? Even this. You knew the day would come. The grief in my chest burned, but alongside it grew something fierce and unshakable. Strength, resolve, love. They had all transformed into armor. That night, as I sat by the window watching the lights of my quiet street, I turned the ring on my finger and felt Charles's presence as though he were beside me. He had not left me alone. He had left me prepared. And now, with the ring returned and the truth in my hands, I was ready for the storm that was coming. When I slid the micro SD card into my laptop a second time, I knew I was about to step deeper into Charles's final act of protection. The files were neatly labeled by date, spanning nearly the last year of his life. My throat tightened as I opened the first video. Charles's camera angle was steady, placed discreetly in our living room. Claire sat on the couch, her voice sharp with frustration. She's stubborn, Ryan, but once she's in a nursing home, it's over. We get her signature on the power of attorney. Sell the house and the debt is gone. Ryan leaned forward, his hands clasped. I spoke to Carter again. He said, if we settle fast, the collectors will back off, but we need that money before the wedding. Without it, we're sunk. The image of my daughter speaking so coldly about me made my chest ache. But there was no denying the clarity of their words. This was no misunderstanding. It was a plot, deliberate and cruel. I clicked on another file. This time the camera captured them in my kitchen. My kitchen, laughing while I slept upstairs. Claire poured herself a glass of wine, her tone mocking. She doesn't even notice half the time. We'll just keep telling everyone she forgets things, and by the time she realizes, the papers will already be signed. Ryan chuckled, kissing her on the temple. We'll be living in that house by summer. My hands shook as I paused the video. The betrayal was unbearable, but beneath the pain burned something steadier. Vindication. They had revealed themselves in their own voices in my own home, recorded by Charles's foresight. I opened an audio file dated just weeks before Charles's death. Ryan's voice was tight with anxiety. If we don't pay the bookie this month, he'll come after me. We need Eleanor's house, Claire. It's the only way out. Claire sighed, her tone exasperated. Then push her harder. Dad's gone. She's all alone now. She'll give in eventually. By proof beyond rumor or suspicion. Their desperation was laid bare, and Charles had caught every word. I gathered the folder, the USB, and the micro SD into a single envelope. My next step was clear. Charles had once mentioned hiring a private investigator when he grew suspicious. I found the business card tucked into the back of the file. Thomas Chin, licensed investigator. My fingers dialed the number before I could second-guess myself. The phone rang twice, then a calm male voice answered. Thomas Chin speaking. This is Eleanor Sullivan, I said quietly. Charles's widow. He worked with you before he passed. There was a pause, then a warm recognition. Mrs. Sullivan, yes. Charles told me you might call one day. Do you have the materials he left you? I do, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. All of it. Bring them to my office, he replied. And Eleanor, what you're holding isn't just sentimental, it's protection. The following morning I sat across from him in a sleek office downtown. His dark suit was neat, his eyes sharp but kind. I handed him the envelope, my heart pounding as he began reviewing the files. He clicked through the recordings methodically, his jaw tightening with each new revelation. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim but certain. Mrs. Sullivan, this is more than enough. These recordings are admissible. They're time-stamped, clearly identify both Claire and her fiancé, and establish intent to defraud you. No judge will question your competency with evidence like this. In fact, it could open the door for criminal charges, conspiracy, financial fraud, even elder abuse. My breath caught. Hearing it said aloud made the weight of it real. So she can't take me to court and claim I'm incompetent? He shook his head firmly. Not with this. This is a shield, Eleanor. A fortress. Charles must have known exactly what he was doing when he built this case. He didn't just protect your finances. He protected your dignity. 4 months I had felt stripped of everything. My husband, my daughter's love, even my reputation among neighbors. But here in these files was proof that I was not weak, not delusional, not alone. Mr. Chin slid the envelope back across the desk. Keep these copies safe. I'll prepare duplicates and submit them to my legal contacts. If Claire or her fiancé try anything, we'll shut it down before it begins. I nodded, gripping the envelope as though it were life itself. Charles always said I was stronger than I knew. He was right, wasn't he? A faint smile tugged at his lips. He knew you'd need reminding. That's why he left this for you. Walking back to my car, the city noise hummed around me, but inside I felt a strange calm. The fear that had followed me for months began to loosen its grip. Claire could spread rumors. She could isolate me. She could even send lawyers to my door. But she could not erase Charles's truth. As I started the engine, I glanced down at the ring now gleaming on my finger. Beneath its weight, I felt the presence of both love and justice. Charles had fought for me even in silence, and now I would carry that fight forward. For the first time in a long time, I believed I could win. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polish, the kind of scent that clings to places where decisions shape lives. I walked through the heavy double doors with my head held high, Charles's folder of evidence tucked securely in my arms. My knees trembled beneath my dress, but I kept moving, each step echoing against the marble floor like a quiet declaration. I'm not afraid. Inside the courtroom, Claire sat at the petitioner's table, Ryan by her side. Her lawyer, the same young woman who had visited my home, shuffled papers with forced confidence. Claire wore a black dress, her hair styled neatly as if presenting herself as the grieving, beautiful daughter. When her eyes met mine across the room, she gave a tight, rehearsed smile. The judge entered, a stern woman with silver hair pulled back into a bun. We rose, then sat again at her signal. The clerk announced the case. Claire Sullivan petitions for guardianship of her mother, Eleanor Sullivan, citing mental incompetency. My breath caught, but I steadied myself. This was the moment Charles had prepared me for. Claire's lawyer stood, her voice smooth and confident. Your Honor, my client only wants what is best for her mother. Mrs. Sullivan has been showing signs of confusion, memory lapses, and difficulty managing her finances since her husband's passing. We believe granting Claire power of attorney is the only way to ensure her safety and stability. She sat down with a flourish as if the matter were already decided. Claire nodded solemnly, casting a sympathetic glance toward me. Might have fooled strangers but not me. The judge turned her gaze to me. Mrs. Sullivan, do you wish to respond? I rose slowly, unfolding Charles's folder on the table before me. My hands were steady now, guided by something larger than fear. Yes, Your Honor. I wish to present evidence. The judge gestured for me to proceed. I began with the investigator's reports, neatly typed pages documenting Claire's debts, her fiancé's loans, and their inquiries about contesting wills. I handed copies to the bailiff who delivered them to the bench. The judge scanned them with furrowed brows. Claire shifted uncomfortably. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper, but I continued. Next, I said, my voice stronger. I have audio recordings collected by my late husband. These capture conversations between Claire and her fiancé discussing plans to declare me incompetent, sell my home, and use the proceeds to settle gambling debts. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as I played a short clip. Claire's voice filled the air, clear and undeniable. Once Mom is in a facility, we'll have control. All we need is her signature. Ryan's voice followed, calm and cold. Exactly. We'll sell quickly and pay off the loans before the wedding. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Claire's face drained of color. Ryan stared at the table, jaw clenched. Their lawyer fumbled with her notes, her composure slipping. I looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, these are not the words of children concerned for their mother's well-being. These are the words of people plotting to strip me of my dignity, my home, and my independence. Spike, the turning point. The judge raised an eyebrow, her expression grave. Do you have more, Mrs. Sullivan? Yes, I said firmly. Video recordings. I presented the files Charles had left on the micro SD card. One showed Claire in my kitchen laughing as she said, she doesn't even notice half the time. By the time she realizes, the papers will already be signed. Ryan's laughter followed, echoing through the silent courtroom. The judge's gavel tapped once. That's enough. The room was still. All eyes turned to Claire, whose face was pale and rigid. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced her with a raised hand. Miss Sullivan, the judge said coldly, this evidence is damning. Not only does it fail to prove your mother's incompetency, it strongly suggests fraud, manipulation, and intent to exploit her. This court will not be granting your petition. In fact, I am ordering these materials referred to the district attorney's office for further investigation. The words fell like a gavel strike, final and unshakable. Claire's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ryan's shoulders slumped. His mask of confidence shattered. Their lawyer stammered about misunderstandings, but the judge's gaze silenced her. I sat quietly, my heart pounding but outwardly calm. This was not a victory of shouting or anger. This was justice served through patience, preparation, and Charles's foresight. The judge looked at me directly. Mrs. Sullivan, you are clearly competent and capable of managing your affairs. This court commends you for your composure and the thoroughness of your presentation. Tears filled my eyes, but I held my head high. Thank you, Your Honor. When the session ended, I gathered my folder and slipped the ring Charles had given me into my palm. I walked past Claire without a word. She looked at me with a mixture of rage and shame, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. Outside the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds, warming my face. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. Not because Claire had been defeated, but because I had proven to myself and to the world that I was not powerless. Charles's quiet revenge had become mine too. We had won not with fury but with truth. The weeks following the court hearing felt like breathing after a storm. For the first time in months, I woke up without dread weighing on my chest. News traveled quickly in our small community. Claire and Ryan were under investigation for financial fraud. Their creditors, once hidden in shadows, now circled them openly. Every knock at their door was no longer an opportunity but a reckoning. I should have felt only bitterness, but instead I felt release. Charles had always taught me that vengeance is hollow unless it transforms into something greater. He had left me not just protection but possibility. The $2 million insurance policy meant for my security sat like a quiet blessing in my account. I knew I could live comfortably for the rest of my years. But comfort alone wasn't enough. One morning as I sipped tea by the window, I realized what Charles would have wanted. He believed in education, in lifting others out of hardship. That was why he worked extra shifts when Claire was young, why he saved pennies even when we had little. My hands trembled slightly as I called the local university foundation. By the end of the week, the paperwork was signed. The Charles and Eleanor Sullivan Scholarship Fund, dedicated to helping first-generation college students who, like us, once had dreams bigger than their bank accounts. The day of the dedication ceremony arrived. I wore a navy dress Charles had always loved, with the pearl brooch he gave me on our 30th anniversary. Standing beside the engraved plaque, I felt his presence, steady and reassuring. The brass letters gleamed. Charles and Eleanor Sullivan Scholarship Fund. Because every dream deserves a chance. Tears stung my eyes as I whispered, "Charles, you always thought ahead for me. And now I choose to turn your love into a legacy." Life began to settle into new rhythms. I returned to church luncheons, book club meetings, and neighborhood gatherings. At first, people were cautious, but then apologies came, hesitant yet heartfelt. Margaret Patterson took my hand one afternoon outside the library. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I believed what Claire said about your memory. I should have trusted you." I squeezed her hand gently. "We all want to believe the best of our children. I don't hold it against you." Her eyes filled with relief, and I felt the bridge between us begin to mend. Slowly, the isolation Claire had built around me dissolved, replaced by a community willing to see the truth. But the most unexpected moment came one quiet evening. The doorbell rang just as I was preparing dinner. When I opened the door, a young woman stood there clutching her purse nervously. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her eyes were Claire's but softer, filled with hesitation rather than calculation. "Grandma," she whispered. It was Melissa, Claire's daughter from her first marriage. I hadn't seen her in years, not since Claire had pulled away and cut off contact. I stepped aside quickly. "Melissa, come in, sweetheart." She sat at the kitchen table, twisting her hands. "I know what Mom did. Everyone's talking about it. I didn't want you to think I'm like her." My chest tightened with both sorrow and joy. "Oh honey, I never thought that." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I missed you. I wanted to come before, but Mom told me you didn't want to see me. She said you were confused." The lies cut deep, but I forced myself to focus on the present. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Melissa, I never stopped wanting to see you. Not for a single day." She broke into sobs and I pulled her into my arms. For the first time in so long, my house echoed with the sound of family. Not betrayal but reconciliation. That night, after Melissa left, with promises to visit weekly, I sat in the living room with the ring Charles had given me resting on my finger. I studied its sparkle, the tiny hidden compartments that had once carried secrets now revealed. No longer felt like a burden. Felt like a torch I was meant to carry forward. As the sun dipped beyond the horizon, casting golden light across the scholarship plaque on the wall, I whispered, "Charles, you worried about leaving me defenseless, but you left me stronger than ever, and I will spend the rest of my days turning that strength into something good." Wherever you are reading this, we hope this story finds you at a moment when your heart is ready. Sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart.